Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Oh, sorry. So this is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, and I am coming to you. Coming to you from Montreal, Jojage, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, and I thought tonight I would devote it mostly to the exposing Irwin Cotler. But before we get to that question, there's actually lots of recent developments in Canadian foreign policy that I will get to. So beginning with Haiti, the Trudeau government continues to raise Haiti in a whole bunch of forums. The Francophonie Summit, which is taking place in Tunisia, meeting with CARICOM officials, and Trudeau yesterday, or maybe the day before, announced that it needed unanimous support from all Haitian political parties to have a foreign military intervention, which is a very curious position, because of course that, if it was taken seriously, it means that that's not happening, because many Haitian political parties already made it clear they don't want a foreign military intervention. So it's not exactly clear what he's doing there. It does seem like the foreign military intervention has failed, in that they're not able to get it through the UN Security Council. Russia and China have blocked the Security Council resolution, and also it appears that the Caribbean countries that they want to staff the mission are not necessarily on board. The other big thing on Haiti that was announced, which is quite interesting, was a list of sanctions yesterday. And the list of sanctions include Michel Martelly, the former president that has been a major power player, of course, in the country since 2010, 2011, is somebody that we intervened in the election to have him win the election back in 2010, 2011. And he is considered the person that, according to New York Times and others, that pushed to have Ariel Henry be appointed by Jovenel Moïse just before he was killed. Ultimately was the core group that ended the power struggle and got Ariel Henry as leader, as prime minister. But so Michel Martelly, this is, we've known that he's tied in with drug running, all kinds of corruption, former Duvalierist. So this is not, to sanction him would be, legitimate in a certain sense. And it was a very interesting development. They also sanctioned Laurent Lamouth, the former prime minister, a number of other top former officials. So the Canadian government is now, they haven't sanctioned a whole bunch of the light-skinned capitalists in the country, but they have now sanctioned quite a few prominent players, and including people who have assets in Canada. And Martelly apparently was in Florida and then immediately flew back to Haiti, possibly concerned that the Americans were going to follow some sort of similar type sanction. So it's a lot of quite interesting developments. To be honest with you, I really don't know where things are headed. Obviously, in all of this, the number one thing Canada could do is can people make sure that they're on mute? There's some people not on mute and hearing a little bit of background noise.
Okay,
but so the sanctions could we don't really know where that's.
Could you soak it in hot water and then I'll clean it?
Joan, can you put yourself on mute?
Sorry.
So it's unclear. Obviously, the core group, Canada pulling out of the core group and saying that they don't support the core group, that would be the easiest and most impactful thing Canada could do for Haiti. But these sanctions now, we are now in a territory where this is more serious in what the Canadian government is doing. Of course, they're not sanctioning any of the foreign officials, and there's a long history of when local players that you pursue your policy through, when they're no longer useful, you discard them. Nonetheless, this goes right to the core of the PHTK regime. On China, Melanie Joly said a couple of days ago that China was upending the global order and was a threat to the global order. Of course, U.S. destruction of Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, elsewhere is Somalia, on and on and on. That's not a threat to the global order, when China has been actually quite a peaceful country. Trudeau also announced a greater military role in the region in East Asia, and talked up again about Operation Neon, which is the Canadian military operation supposedly to enforce UN sanctions against North Korea, but it's not actually a UN mission, and they constantly sort of blur that question. Yes, there are UN sanctions against North Korea, but UN hasn't mandated a mission to enforce those sanctions. So Canada has brought that upon itself, and it's used quite clearly as a way to target China. Also, I'm sure people saw that there was President Xi, the Chinese president, had a dressing down, if you like, of Trudeau for saying that he went public with the discussion that they'd had a couple of days earlier at the G20, and basically complaining that Trudeau had put out a press release saying that he had criticized China's interference in Canadian politics. Today, Trudeau, I guess, he'd been asked this question of, this report that CSIS leaked, I think, a few weeks ago. So now, apparently, a report that they delivered it back in the start of the year to the Prime Minister's office, that said that China had interfered and supported 11 candidates in the 2019 election. Today, Trudeau was pressed on it again, and he basically said there's no evidence. That he wasn't presenting with evidence of who the players are, who the MPs are that China supposedly backed. That makes complete sense to me. I think this is almost entirely a CSIS way to try to create tension between Canada and China. They're trying to put pressure on Trudeau to get tough on China, tied to the Asia Pacific policy strategy, that paper that's coming out anytime now. And the Trudeau government has been reluctant to completely join the US Five Eyes campaign targeting China. And CSIS and the Canadian military, communication security establishment, are pressing the government through their different means to go to take a more hardline position. So the China policy, I'm sure there's going to be tons of criticism of Trudeau in tomorrow's papers, probably tonight's CBC, The National, whatever, on this question of evidence of China interfering in Canada's elections in 2019 or not. We'll see more, I guess, of how this plays out. And like I said, I don't buy this as, again, I said this last week. I think China, no doubt, does have its different means of influencing Canadian politics, and there's obviously spying that takes place, et cetera, but it's nothing compared to U.S. influence, which is often very open and doesn't even get reported on. So we'll see where that goes with the China question. Trudeau also his Twitter account posted about this claim that Iran had planned to execute 15,000 protesters, and they had to, and it basically was completely untrue, and it circulated all around social media. And I guess at some point, whoever runs Trudeau's Twitter account tweeted out about it, and they were forced to withdraw the tweet. They've never apologized for it, but it all fits with their sort of like target Iran. And even if it's really hard to believe kind of information, it's Iran's fault. Undoubtedly, it's Iran's fault anyways. And another development that was reported on, the Maple, I believe, did the story, but I think it came from Michael Buckert at Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, was that the Parliament's human rights report that was released a few days ago, they completely ignore the Palestinian question. They ignore Israel's killing of Abu Akleh, the Al Jazeera reporter, and just as sort of the human rights. It's the human rights of enemies, right? That's what our Parliament is concerned about, is the human rights of enemy states. Also, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East just released a statement about access to information files that they got on Canada's position on Amnesty's report saying that Israel was committing the crime of apartheid, that was released in February. What the report shows, what the internal files show, is that there's no substance to the Canadian government's dismissal of it. It's just, we dismiss it because we don't like it, and we haven't found the error in what Amnesty did. It's just sort of political dismissal, and that's kind of how Melanie Joly has acted in response to questions from Heather McPherson of the NDP on the question of Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and other human rights groups finding Israel committing the crime of apartheid. In a somewhat related development, an executive member of the NDP, a BC representative on the NDP federal executive, Ryan Painter, responded to a tweet I put out, or a comment I put on a comment that was based on a tweet, criticizing Noah Tepperman, who's an NDP activist who's on the board of the Windsor Jewish National Fund. The Jewish National Fund, of course, is a explicitly racist organization that pursues land use policies that exclude non-Jews, policies that Canada made illegal 70 years ago. They used to have racist land use policies where people had, and you hear stories about every so often, where a home is sold in like West Vancouver and it says no Black people, no Asian people, no Jews, whatever, allowed to live there. But that was all made illegal in a series of court and political legislative moves in the 1940s and 1950s. But that's what the JNF pursues in Israel. So I was criticizing Tepperman, and this NDP executive, Ryan Painter, responded by saying, quote, "Don't listen to anything Eve Engler says. He's Canada's leading anti-Semite and doesn't want anything more than to spread Jew hatred." So that's the president, or that's an executive member of the NDP, federal NDP, who is just going whole hog on making sure that no one should possibly listen to anything I ever said, because he doesn't like me. I wrote about Painter about 2 months ago. Painter wrote this or criticized Jagmeet Singh for standing in solidarity with Palestinians for a statement he came out on on Palestinians. And Painter was pushing the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs criticism of the NDP leader. And I wrote this piece about him that was really weird, because he's condemning people for using the word apartheid on Israel. But in fact, he'd actually used the word apartheid in Israel multiple times in the past, he himself. So something happened, very weird. Something happened a couple years ago, and all of a sudden he completely shifted from, calling it as it was to all of a sudden being completely tied in with the sort of Israel lobby kind of perspective. On Ukraine, there's obviously many developments, but one I thought I'd point out is how Andrew Coyne, one of the most prominent journalists in the country on the Power and Politics on the National and then also a Globe and Mail columnist, he blamed Russia for the missiles that fell in Poland, that killed 2 people in Poland. And he basically said this was Russia doing it, and hasn't backed away from it, even as it's been shown to be not true. And Trudeau also, in his position on what happened in Poland, he started backing away as the Americans and others. It's clear it wasn't Russian missiles. He backed away, but his statement was basically, it might not have been Russia, but Russia's to blame anyways, because Russia instigated the invasion. Russia's bombing Ukraine, and whatever Ukraine did was just a mistake responding to the Russian aggression. It's not clear if it was a mistake or Ukraine is trying to prod a greater NATO involvement. The way Zelensky responded to it with saying immediately, this is Article 5 collective security question, suggests that maybe they were trying to use this as a way to expand the war. But what's interesting about Trudeau, I have a certain sympathy for what Trudeau is saying, of course. The principal aggressor becomes responsible. Nuremberg Tribunal pointed out that they responsible for the entirety of the horrors that then follow. So there's a certain logic to that, but you find that on an important issue that's relevant right now, they don't apply that same logic. So, for instance, with regards to Iran, right now, over the past since early 2020, Canadian relations with Iran have just deteriorated, and they deteriorated because Iran blew up mistakenly a Ukrainian airplane that had lots of Iranian Canadians on it. And then that has been used to really go at Iran. But Iran blew up that plane after the Americans killed General Soleimani in Iraq and about 10 other people. And what the Americans did was incredible act of aggression, violation of international law, violation of Iraqi sovereignty. But the Canadian government doesn't apply like that. What the Americans did is completely ignored now, and it's just the bad Iranians that blew up this airplane. So that same type of logic should, of course, apply in both instances. The Maple published a interesting article based upon a bunch of accessed information that took more than a year that the military refused to release, around Operation Unifier, the training mission for the Ukrainian forces. And when there was a report from American University, Georgetown University, I believe it was, back in September maybe of 2021, that got covered by David Puglisi at the Ottawa Citizen about the Canada training neo-Nazis, far-right forces in Ukraine. And this wasn't the first report, but this was the most detailed, I believe. academic report that showed these images, and it was coming from the Azov battalion and the I believe it's C14, another far right group, from their own Telegram accounts, Instagram accounts, Facebook, whatever. And what was reported by Alex Kosh in the Maple with whose access information was that the Canadian military they sort of poo-pooed these claims, but they didn't provide any evidence. And all they were concerned about was how this would impact Operation Unifier. They weren't concerned about the actual substance of, is it problematic to be training far-right forces? But it was about this sort of geostrategic question. So Heather McPherson, the NDP Foreign Affairs critic, 4 or 5 days ago, she tweeted out about she tweeted an interview she had done on CTV on Russia, Sergei Lavrov being at the G20, and whether Canada should meet with Melanie Joly should meet with Lavrov at the G20. And she took a really hard line position. No way, we don't meet with Lavrov until Russia leaves Ukraine. Full stop, as she put it. It was real, seriously bombastic position, which she tweeted about. So she, wanted to boast about doing this interview. At the same time, about a week ago, the head of the American military, Michael Miley, floated that Ukraine should talk about negotiations. And he repeated that a couple of days later. So here you have the NDP Foreign Affairs critic who's saying no on anything to do with negotiations, coming up with a peace accord, figuring out a diplomatic way out of the war and conflict. That's the NDP Foreign Affairs critic. And then you have the head of the American military saying, now's the time, and repeating this, now's the time to start talking about negotiations. I don't think it's a very good look for the NDP Foreign Affairs critic, but clearly that's the position. There doesn't seem to be much pushback within the NDP power structure on that. 2 days after her statement about the G20, sorry, my computer just died, so I'm going to be changing computers here. Do people hear me properly?
Yeah, no problem, Eve.
Okay, so McPherson tweeted out on Thursday about meeting Irwin Cotler. And she tweeted out about Cotler's wisdom and commitment to human rights. So she chose the she chose to laud about how she met with Cotler. She met with Cotler about a month earlier with Jagmeet Singh and Bill Browder. And so I thought that it's worth having a proper discussion about Cotler. I actually think we need probably could be a whole book about Cotler and what Cotler is sort of, how he positions himself and his importance to Canadian foreign policy and the positions he's taken over the years and the fraudulent nature of his human rights activism and how the media responds to it, et cetera, et cetera. Certainly it deserves a full, webinar presentation with people breaking down different components of Cotler's positions on different issues. But I'll do at least a broad overview. The first question I have is, why would they be meeting? Okay. Sid Ryan suggested, former head of the OFL, he suggests maybe Cotler was trying to pressure McPherson around her better policies around Palestine of recent. That's a possibility. That wouldn't explain why McPherson has publicized it. That's a political decision that she made to publicize it, which I find an interesting political decision. So she believes that this is going to somehow serve her
and the NDP's purpose by publicizing on Twitter. Now, if you look at Twitter, it's almost entirely negative commentary for her meeting with Cotler. So, who exactly she's playing to here by publicizing it on Twitter, I don't really know. Presumably, this is about her, sort of demonstrating her bona fides around the establishment, and like I'm part of the establishment. Cotler is this important figure within the liberal foreign policy establishment, and whatnot. But I don't know. And it's an interesting question. What she's exactly planning on doing. The first thing to look at Cotler is to understand this is somebody who is a human rights activist at the service of U.S. empire. He targets those who are in the crosshairs of Washington, and then he becomes a bombastic, a great humanitarian concern for those rights violations. The place where he is most obviously not a human rights activist is with regards to Palestine. That he is clearly a Jewish supremacist. He is somebody who is deeply committed to Zionism and deeply committed to, quite frankly, the dispossession of Palestinians. He wouldn't admit to the latter part, maybe not the first part either, but he certainly he would admit to being committed to Zionism. And he's somebody that, a couple years ago when we were protesting the Jewish National Fund, he was going to the Jewish National Fund's fundraiser here in Montreal. So he's pretty comfortable with explicit racism. He when the International Criminal Court was investigating Israel's war crimes, he sent a letter saying the ICC doesn't have a place in investigating Israeli war crimes. In 2021, in May, when there was the resurgence of Israeli ethnic cleansing and violence, he participated in Salish and others can make sure that you're muted. He participated in basically an Israel war rally back in May of 2021, where they celebrated Canadians, Montrealers fighting in the IDF and whatnot. One of the more interesting, it's an endless stream of him defending Israeli crimes, of course. One of the more interesting ones is in 2006, after Israel's killed about 1,200 in Lebanon, he participated in this security conference for top Israeli military officials. And it was basically a strategizing conference. And his main point was that you have to manage the message in modern war. So this is, again, this is, human rights, whatever, but he's speaking to Israeli military officials about how you have to, manage the message in war, because he understands that Israel's ability to destroy Lebanon is contingent upon having support in Washington and Ottawa, London, etc. He's also somebody who's been pushing he's of course Canada's special envoy to combat anti-Semitism. He's been pushing the new anti-Semitism, as he calls it, since at least after Israel's 1982 invasion of Lebanon that left about 15,000 civilians dead. So he's been pushing this new anti-Semitism line for decades now, and it's completely connected to Israel's human rights violations. He was at the center of the Canadian Parliamentary Committee to Combat Anti-Semitism there in the mid-2000s. That was an effort, again, it's sort of predecessor to the whole International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, the anti-Palestinian definition. It's all part of a process of protecting Israel from criticism. Back in 2002, Scott Weinstein pointed this out to me. He emailed me about this event tonight with some stuff on Cotler. And again, this deserves a very broad, like book form, even quite frankly, but certainly a full webinar form. He pointed out that Cotler helped Hillel Concordia sue. I'd forgotten about this. The Concordia Student Union, back when Sabine Priesinger, I, and others were in the student union, claiming that the CSU was anti-Semitic, which the judge Weinstein pointed out throughout, when he realized that there was actually Jewish figures on both sides of the question, and it was clearly a political issue. Kotler's wife was a Likud top official back in the 1970s, I believe, and his daughter was in the Knesset. So he has a home in Israel. He's deeply tied in to Israel. But beyond Palestine, where that I think is his main issue, is justifying dispossession of Palestinians. Beyond that, his pro-Israel position leads him to being deeply anti-Iran and targeting Iran, the Iranian government. So he set up something called Iran Accountability Week on Parliament Hill. In 2014, Cotler had the MEK's leader speak at Iran Accountability Week. The MEKs supported Iraq in the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. It's been labeled sort of cultish. It's presumably mostly funded by the Saudis. And it's not an organization that has much support within Iran, but it's right at the center of efforts to destabilize the Iranian government. And Cotler had been part of a whole push in the US to get the MEK removed from the US terrorist list, which was ultimately successful. And then that happened in Canada as well. More recently, Kotler's been right involved in the whole process of playing up the victims, the families of the victims of the Iranian bombing of the Ukrainian Airlines flight in 2020. He's participated in webinars on that. In his Raoul Wallenberg Center, the lawyer there is the lawyer for the victims of the coalition of family members of the victims of that terrible tragedy. So he keeps pushing this, sort of effort to weaken Iran. Beyond that, on Venezuela, right? Cotler played this real significant role in like 2018, 2017 on the building up of the campaign, which ultimately Guaido, the whole self-declaration. So Cotler was Leopoldo Lopez's lawyer. Leopoldo Lopez is the Voluntad Popular, the party of Juan Guaido, which is I think the fourth biggest of the opposition parties, is considered the most sort of like violent of the opposition parties within Venezuela, one of the most sort of maximalist. So he was Leopoldo Lopez's lawyer, and they really made it like he was Leopoldo Lopez's a prisoner of conscience, a political prisoner, and really played this up. Cotler did. And the South African representative in Venezuela, so Cotler claims to have been Nelson Mandela's lawyer, but there's nothing in Nelson Mandela's biography about Cotler. It's basically Cotler claiming this fact, and Mandela mentions many other lawyers. I believe he himself was a lawyer, but so Cotler's really played that up in subsequent years. And the South African official in Venezuela at the time said there's no evidence that Cotler was Mandela's lawyer, but yet the Canadian media continues on with the tale of Cotler as being Mandela's lawyer, even though South African representatives have dismissed that fact. But what Cotler, his main play in the Venezuela stuff in 2018, is that he was one of three international experts, quote unquote, that the head of the OAS, Luis Almagro, created this body to look at human rights violations in Venezuela. And then they sent that to the International Criminal Court. The Canadian government was funding this, of course, and pushing it. And at the launching of this report, in 400-page report on alleged human rights violations in Venezuela, Cotler said, quote, Venezuela's government itself was responsible for the worst ever humanitarian crisis in the region. The worst ever humanitarian crisis in the region. So like, all the indigenous people that were wiped out in Guatemala and I mean, can go on and on, but different examples, all the indigenous people in Haiti, or not what's now Haiti, that were wiped out, the slave plantations, on and on and on. But of course, what was going on in Venezuela was the worst ever humanitarian crisis, which just speaks to how hard line Cotler is. And it's across the board, right? He's like pushing on Russia. He targets those, the Uyghur question. He's real pushing on the Uyghur question, on Russia. He targets those who are in the crosshairs of Washington. Sometimes there's substance behind, the human rights violations of those countries. Sometimes there's not, or very little. I think in the case of Venezuela, the evidence was quite thin. But he's been really tied in with Bill Browder and the whole push for the Magnitsky Act. That's the Canadian government, the sanctioning officials, and Bill Browder was this capitalist in Russia that made tons of money off of the fire sale, the shock therapy sell-off of private or of public companies in the 90s and early 2000s. And then Bill Browder has, supposedly turned into this, human rights activist based upon his colleague Magnitsky that died in jail. And so Cotler's really pushed on the question of the Magnitsky Act, which the Trudeau government brought in 2017 and used to sanction Venezuelan officials, used to sanction Russian officials, a few other places, other countries as well. And so he was real lobbying for that. And like I said, a month ago, he was in Ottawa with Browder again, pushing Browder's case in a Russian who's a political prisoner, and pushing that. Browder also has some associations with the whole like Epstein and Cotler as well. Has Cotler's like best friend is Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz, of course, was Epstein's lawyer that got that scandalous agreement where Epstein in the mid 2000s, where Epstein was allowed to go basically, didn't go to jail, well, went to jail, but it was 6 days a week. He could leave jail to go work in his office all day. And Dershowitz was also implicated in accused of having raped some of Epstein's sex slaves. Browder's tied into that whole milieu, and Cotler's tied into a number of other individuals and groups associated with the whole Epstein scandal. It's amazing. Can just make sure to mute as well, please? And it's amazing how little discussion there is on this question. Cotler just. Hi, Murray. Could you please try to mute?
Oh, sorry.
So the media completely uninterested in Cotler's association with Dershowitz, Epstein, etc. Another issue, another sort of thing that makes it really hard to take human rights claims seriously is Cotler has worked with Paul Kagame. Paul Kagame has more African blood on his hands than any other official, any other individual. And it's current, it's continuing right now. What we're seeing, the M23, which is the Rwanda-backed force in Eastern Congo, has rekindled their war and displaced over 100,000, I think, into maybe even hundreds of thousands again. And Kagame, of course, shot down the plane that creates the mass killings of spring, the genocidal killings of spring 1994. Then he invades Congo, topples the government in the Congo. Then when the Congolese government he imposes expels Rwandan troops, he reinvades, leads to a 8-country war that leads to like literally millions dead. And then Kagame and Rwandan forces, continue in Eastern Congo, many different facets, many different proxy forces they've used in recent years, the latest one being the M23. And, many people in Congo refer to Kagame as, Africa's Hitler, right? This is a rapper, a prominent Congolese rapper, did this a couple of days ago. I saw this posted on Twitter. And the blood on Kagame's hands is extensive. But Kagame is somebody who's in the good books of Bill Clinton, Tony Blair. He's close to the Israel lobby in the US. And so Cotler, again, this great human rights activist, is willing to shake hands with Kagame. So it's also about what Cotler doesn't say, right? You never hear him say about the killings in Haiti after the Canadian coup, Afghanistan, Libya, right? So all the human rights violations the US and Canadian government are part of. Canadian mining companies. At one point, I searched for Cotler. I don't think he's ever talked about Canadian mining companies. The global powerhouse behemoth involved in so many human rights violations. That's not an issue that Cotler's too interested in, because that would take on, power in this country, which is, the mining industry. But Cotler is really a darling of the dominant media, and it gets across the board. The National Post a few weeks ago had a front page article titled "A Tireless Pursuer of Justice. Irwin Cotler takes on the Putin regime." It's not just Heather McPherson, NDP. Elizabeth May with the Greens. She did many, many events on Parliament when Cotler was an MP and later on. When myself, Dimitri Lascaris, and others disrupted Cotler event at Concordia in 2019, we went on stage, we had our Free Palestine placards. A couple of days later, the House of Commons apparently had a standing ovation for Cotler when it was raised. I believe it was like a conservative MP that raised this horrible thing that happened. For about 10 minutes of Cotler's time, he had been disrupted by people saying, "Why don't you stand up for Palestinian rights?" challenging his position on Venezuela. And so the House of Commons apparently gave a standing ovation to Cotler after he was, harangued by the activists at Concordia University. So he really is a darling of the dominant media. A question I have, with the exception of Palestine, where I think Heather McPherson really has moved to a much better position and would be clearly at odds with Cotler's position in Palestine. With the exception of Palestine, I'm not really sure that McPherson has a particular problem with Cotler's positions, right? So I think to understand why she would tweet out about it is that she more or less aligns with Cotler's view on Russia, on China, on Iran. Another part to this that I think is somewhat interesting, I think it generalized beyond Cotler, so I think there's a lot of people that excuse his deeply anti-Palestinian positions as a sort of like, well, he cares about his people, right? He's Jewish and he cares about the Jewish state and Jews, and so that excuses this hardline anti-Palestinian position. I think that a lot of progressives still do that with B'nai B'rith, with Sija, and others who are clearly taking hardline anti-human rights positions, but it's sort of like excused away. I think in large part on sort of a sense of ethnic grounds. That's how someone like Heather McPherson might justify Cotler's anti-Palestinian positions. So one thing, there is some sense that some of this is catching up with Cotler. He still is a darling of the dominant media, but there was a few months ago, the Ottawa District School Board apparently postponed a talk that Cotler was supposed to give based upon his pushing of the IHRA anti-Palestinian definition of anti-Semitism. He spoke at University of Toronto at the start of the year, and then 45 faculty members sent a letter to the dean saying that he basically promoted anti-Palestinian racism. He was forced to withdraw from that event. He was going to speak at Ariel University in the occupied West Bank. So I think there is some sort of bubbling below the surface understanding of Cotler as a fraud when it comes to human rights, mostly around the Palestine question. Obviously, a lot more needs to be done on that issue. And so I think I'll just leave it there. And if people have questions, comments, go ahead. Go ahead, Joan. You're muted. You should unmute yourself first.
There. Hi. Well, I've been really concerned, as I know you must be as well, in UN Watch, and he belongs to UN Watch, and it is such a misnomer. And because that group exists, UN Watch has ECOSOC status at the UN. That means they can go into any one of the UN human rights, whatever they want to go into, they have access. And that's what they were using all the time against Venezuela. And it's such a misnomer, because UN Watch, you'd think he'd be also concerned about all the invasions of the US. The only thing he targets is anyone who criticizes Israel and any of the socialist countries. So I think, I know I was trying for years to get his status revoked, but it doesn't make any sense that he has this special status. And it's such, people think it's a it's a fair organization, UN Watch. And who's the lawyer in the, one in?
My understanding, Cotler is Hillel Neuer runs UN Watch. That was the individual.
But he was also always a member of it.
Yeah,
over the years.
So Cotler is on the board of UN Watch. I understand.
Yeah.
He is on the board. Okay, I didn't know that.
I don't know if that's current, but he was.
I know that.
When I was in Venezuela in 2012, he certainly was very involved at that time, and as you pointed out, he worked with he worked with what's his name again? The one you mentioned about the
Hillel Neuer. No, I think that Hillel Neuer talks.
He's just a horrid person. I mean, the things that he said about Israel, things that he said about Venezuela were just absolutely outrageous, especially when Chavez died. I don't know if you saw that, but I mean, just he because there was support, but I think there has to be a campaign to remove that organization, because they have really been targeting any country, and particularly Palestine. I mean, and particularly Venezuela over the years, and of course Palestine. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. Thanks.
Yeah, Hillel Neuer's Cotler is very close with Hillel Neuer, who's the head of UN Watch. So go ahead, Gregory.
Oh, hi, Yves. Looking forward to seeing you at Oisey on Wednesday night. Would you agree that the penny has dropped now with Israel, that really they are now, with Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, B'Tselem condemning it as an apartheid state, that even in the West here, we're starting to see that young Jews are abandoning the synagogues in droves. There's a real resistance starting to emerge in the Canadian public. Even in the United States now, people are questioning the funding and the arming of the state of Israel. Would you suggest that that's a real indication now that people like Cotler, their days are numbered? People are, this shit just can't go on any longer. Pardon my language.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's undoubtedly that's partly true, but it's also, I mean, you see what happened with Joel Harden, the NDP MPP in Ottawa, who's like the most leftward NDP MPP. He had a talk with Peter Larson from Canada Palestine Talks, I believe it is an interview. I haven't listened to the whole interview, but a few minutes of it. And CJA attacked it 2 days ago. There's nothing in the interview nothing in the interview that is there's anything wrong with. You can argue, tad bit clumsy in some way, and I don't even agree with that. And it's he had to, the NDP brass came down on him. He had to apologize, and now CJ's saying that he should be thrown out of the NDP caucus. So he, in the interview, he said that Israel was responsible for the most violence in the Middle East. And, you can debate that. I think you can make a case it's the US. But like if you, so Avi Lewis tweeted out defending Joel Harden, which is good. But in Avi Lewis's tweet, he says that, it's incorrect to say that Israel's responsible for most violence in the Middle East. And I mean, you can have that debate. There is a debate to be had. But if you actually look, if you're serious about having that discussion, you got to look at the violence that Israel is responsible for in the Middle East. And it is incredible. I mean, they bomb Syria weekly, multiple times a week. They have bombed Libya, Iraq, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, obviously Palestine endlessly. Believe Sudan, they've been blowing up people in Iran. Yeah. Israel has been at war its whole existence on a pound for pound, on a per capita basis. There's probably never been a more violent country in the history of humanity. I mean, the US is clearly responsible for more violence, but it is a way, way, way bigger country. So, that's not, I mean, again, it may be not technically correct what Harden said. It's the ability to deflect criticism based upon the idea of it being anti-Jewish. The power that has is just completely phenomenal, right? It really is. It's just amazing how that able, like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, everyone, all the South African officials, this is an apartheid state. In fact, it's a lot worse than South African apartheid was. It's way, way more violent than South Africa was. And yet, the victims are those who are defending all of it, right? The victims are CJ. The victims, I mean, it's pretty phenomenal. When does that all break? At what point do people just, there's no doubt, I've seen myself, people don't take the smears of anti-Semite or whatever, they don't take it as seriously as they did a few years ago. That process has broken down, whatever. How long it's going to take to get over the hump, I don't really know. But yeah, there's no case to be made for Israel. Liberal-minded people can't make the case for Israel. What they can do is they can smear and they can say, go ahead, Laura. Oh, you're muted. I'm only seeing your hand. I don't see anyone else's hand.
Sorry, Yuri was before me. Yuri,
I can't.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Laura. It's okay.
I can't see Yuri. I can't.
Okay. No, I just had a silly question. It was about this whole marvelous dressing down of Trudeau, which made us all so delighted. But I'm just wondering, did that even get mentioned in the Canadian media? As you know, I'm in the US and I can't even stand most mainstream media anymore. So I'm just wondering, did that even get mentioned? Do people even talk about it?
It got quite a bit of attention. It was actually kind of interesting. The National Post had like 2 front page articles about it, but then the Globe and Mail had it on like page 4 at the bottom of the page. I thought was kind of interesting. I don't really know
what did they say about it. What was their take?
Well,
like,
the Chinese or the National Post perspective was the bully, the Chinese bully, They used it as a way, and the CBC had people on that talked about the body language and how the body language was aggressive from Xi and stuff like that. I kind of like. I think it gets too much attention because I think that there's some underlying kind of issues that are that kind of get lost in that, and I think that the battle going on within the Canadian government and the Canadian elite between different factions over what to do with regards to China I think, quite a fascinating political battle that's not getting the level of attention it deserves. And yeah.
Could you expand on that? Like that, I haven't heard that before.
Well, I think that the business class, the big chunks of the business class don't want this. Clearly, they don't want it. And big chunks of Global Affairs Canada don't want the battle with China. They see making money. They see it as an alternative to the U.S. market. They understand. I mean, all the Canadian companies that were buying Huawei products, the Bell and I forget which the second one was, but was it? And so the telecommunications companies that were buying Huawei products, they didn't want to lose billions of dollars and taking Huawei stuff out. This is driven by the CSIS's report claiming Chinese interference in Canada is CSIS pressuring the Trudeau government to get harder on China. And the Trudeau government is reluctant, and the Trudeau government is reluctant because there's important Canadian capitalists who don't want it. Most of the Chinese community doesn't want it, including there's prominent players and a fairly wealthy Chinese Canadian capitalists included in that that don't want that level of conflict. And so I think that CSIS is basically trying to stoke conflict, and Trudeau's kind of floating all around, and that's why he's flops back and forth on this question of one day he announces he's pushing back against Chinese interference, and the next day he says, well, there's actually no evidence of Chinese interference. It's based upon where he's getting pressure in the sort of short term, but the media is just completely it's amazing how much the media is just one-sided. The business community, the corporate interests that want relations with China, they're not really, they just cower. They're not really willing to sort of stand up and take on the sort of media onslaught.
Could I just say one last thing? What about the various political parties? Are you seeing a real difference between them and how they want to react to China?
Well, the Liberals are the least. The NDP and the Conservatives are criticizing from a hawkish position, right? And the Conservatives, they're playing up the whole interference thing because a couple of Conservative candidates lost in the probably three lost who were sitting Conservative MPs, two in Richmond and one in I forget what suburb it is in Toronto. They ridings that are predominantly Chinese Canadian, and they lost those seats because they were taking this hardline position that the Chinese community, in its majority, not that there's the most vocal elements are hawkish, Canadian government, U.S. government funded groups, but in its majority don't want this, and so the Conservatives who are taking very hawkish positions on China previously, they are now very excited by this CSIS report, so they're tied in with that, and the NDP is very much on board with this kind of stuff, and the whole Uyghur question is a big part of that. Someone like Jenny Kwan, the Vancouver NDP MP, they represent, I think, the more sort of a certain type of Hong Konger who are have a sort of pro-British, historically pro-British, anti-China kind of positions. Some of it, of course, legitimate, but I think that yeah. So and Elizabeth May, the Green Party, are pretty on board with it. Sort of get tough on China as well. Sorry, Yuri, go ahead.
Yeah, Eve, I was just you mentioned Cotler's ties to the Epstein scandal, and I was just wondering because I know Whitney Webb has just released a 2-volume book on the history of sexual blackmailing, how Epstein came to be, and so forth. So I was just wondering if you could enlighten us more on the Cotler's ties to Epstein and Bill Browder. I actually did not know that Browder actually had ties to that whole network. And then Naheed had a question for you, asking if you pressed any charges against the if you if you pressed any charges when you were assaulted at the Hillel Nuri gathering speech.
No, we haven't pressed charges yet. Dimitri Lascaris, he sent a letter right away asking them not to keep all the video. And so if they erase the video, that then puts them in a added weaker legal position. The plan is not to press charges because the odds of the Crown taking the case seriously is not very high. The plan is to launch a civil suit. Which has a lower, it also has a lower, not only do we have more control over it, it has a lower bar. So now with regards to the Epstein connection, so sorry, somebody has try to mute if possible. With regards to Epstein, so Browder, this is a little while ago, I wrote about this. I've detailed some of this. I tried to get in touch with Webb, asking if she had any more details, and she never actually got back to me. I'd be curious to look at her book or books. But so Browder is Ghislaine Maxwell's. Browder was the close partner with Ghislaine Maxwell's father, who is, what's his name again? He was the British
Robert Maxwell, former
Robert Maxwell, yeah,
former owner of the Daily Mirror.
Yeah, who dies like in a very mysterious kind of way.
Yeah,
he found that he owed a bunch of money and the pensions were unpaid or something to that effect, and then he sort of disappeared. And then Israel did a like it gave him a state funeral, I believe, even, or something like that. And so that's one Browder, part of Browder's. There's also, I'm forgetting the name of the banking Saja, I think Saja family that was tied in with Robert Maxwell and Browder. When the big fund in when he's making huge profits, like wild profits in Russia. Browder made just like incredible money, like 3,000% return over a few years or something like that. So it actually, in my story, and again, I this is a while ago, quite a while ago I wrote this, but you can punch my name in and Google and Cotler, Dershowitz, Browder, Maxwell, or Epstein. So Cotler's done events with that foundation, and he's also done events with the guy who was apparently the source of money for Epstein. I think he's like he's a American. I'm forgetting his name right now. He's basically, so he gave the home that Epstein had in New York. That was like $60 million home. He just gave it to Epstein. So the thought is maybe Epstein's had something on him. So Cotler's done a bunch of stuff with a couple of these players with their foundations, like public events and stuff with their foundations, with a couple of players in the Epstein scandal. But the main thing is Cotler calls Dershowitz his best friend. So Dershowitz is still on the board of the Raoul Wallenberg Center. Okay, so this is a human rights center. So Dershowitz is all this stuff about, like, first of all, he's like Donald Trump's lawyer. He's, accused by, I think, 2 different women of that were, that he raped them when they were 15 or 16 or whatever exactly, like that they were, Epstein's sex slaves. And so, but Dershowitz still on the Raoul Wallenberg Center board, or on he's a fellow, I believe it is. And so Dershowitz and Cotler are like best friends. Like some Globe Mail story says that the first person that Cotler phoned when he got appointed justice minister was Dershowitz, and so he's got this like 40 or 50 year long history with Dershowitz that doesn't seem to have changed, despite Dershowitz deep implication in the Epstein scandal. So in the story I wrote about this, I said, well, you know, that like I emailed Cotler and I emailed the Raoul Wallenberg Center. Of course, they didn't respond to my questions about this. But if some corporate journalists were to start asking some of these questions, and you know, these are fair questions to ask. I think you could do it in a way that's not, you know, presuming that Cotler is tied into the Epstein scandal, but there's enough pieces that kind of have him kind of tied to it to ask some questions. Did you ever meet Epstein? Did you ever go on his plane? Or, you know, whatever, these types of things. But no one in the dominant media is interested in asking those questions. What I pointed out at the time is there's all these like people like Thomas Mulcair and Sinclair, the First Nations, forgetting his first name right now, Indigenous
Murray Sinclair.
Yeah, Murray Sinclair. He was on the Raoul Wallenberg's board alongside Dershowitz. So I was saying, like, if Dershowitz and Kotler's anti-Palestinian policies aren't enough to make you a little bit weary about being on this board, what about, you know, his ties in with the Epstein sex scandal? I wrote about this, but that didn't seem to have any traction.
Yves B. Sandhu has his hand up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question, Yves. Just want to hear your reaction analysis on when with the Xi Trudeau dust up. And what I was sort of really surprised at was, you know, Xi's telling him, hey, don't do this, you know, until we first discuss. Don't make public what we discuss in private, that sort of stuff. And then Trudeau's response was actually very messagey and very kind of bureaucratic almost. It wasn't like, you know, who the fuck you think you are or something like that. Like, that's what, if you're insulted, you do something like this. But it was very, how can I say it, you know, poised and almost like word for word, as if something that, you know, okay, this is what you're going to say in this time type of thing, right? And then also, let's remember that he had done something similar. Donald Trump had accused him of doing the same thing at a G20 in Quebec City, that they had flown off and then Trudeau had said something and, you know, that sort of stuff. So anyway, all this to say is I'm questioning to what extent do you think this is just a sort of a spontaneous thing and something happened? And to what do you think that is actually a little more to it vis-a-vis Trudeau? Not necessarily Xi, but Trudeau. Like, or is it just I'm reading too much into it? But I just feel that there's something going on.
I don't think you're reading too much into it. I think this was staged to some extent. I mean, we got the apparently it was the media pool that caught this, right? So whether Xi wanted to stage it or Trudeau wanted to stage it, somebody that's the like, I wouldn't say almost certain, but the likely scenario is it was designed to be caught by the cameras. That's my understanding of how it was, you know, who filmed it. It's possible it serves both sides, right? That's possible, and that it was calculated. I completely agree with you that Trudeau's response was very formulaic, but that's kind of Trudeau in general. Like, I don't think the guy's, you know, I don't think he's the smartest guy around. Maybe I don't know. He's pretty good at saying his lines and that kind of stuff. So I think he did that well.
So if we assume that it's let's just say for purpose of theory that or discussion, that let's just say they're both in on it, okay? Because clearly Xi's coming in. I mean, that's the sort of thing you could take a guy aside and say, hey, by the way, or, you know, send it through emissaries or whatnot. What purpose would that serve for both the parties if that was just only in speculation?
Well, I think it's for Trudeau, it clearly served that he's been pressured on the question of this CSIS report. I mean, he's been criticized on the China file in general, right? His comment he made in 2013 about China being before he was prime minister, about being the functionality of the basic dictatorship. I forget the exact formulation he used, but basically praising China's political system, which he called dictatorial, for its economic progress. He's been criticized for that for, you know, years and years. So that's been going on. in the most recent phase, and he's been criticized, I think, in general on the China file from the right in recent years. And then over the past 10 days before, there was all this pressure about why did you sit on the CSIS report showing that China had interfered in Canada's elections. And so he then announces that he then announces that in a press release that I berated the Chinese president around election interference, and so, you know, but I sort of agree. I'm not actually sure how it serves Trudeau quite as well. I think it does, you know, mostly internationally, it got, at least on social media, it got played as being a kind of a, you know, a dressing down of Trudeau and kind of embarrassing for Trudeau. But it also, you know, the media in this country played it like the bully, the Chinese bully, and that Trudeau stood up to the Chinese bully. There was a fair bit of play for that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. What do you think?
I don't know either. I just think that response was not natural. Okay, you know, it was two guys talking, two big shots and whatnot, and then afterwards, you know, the sort of the follow up and stuff. And remember, I think there is this audience of the Pierre Poilievres and Michael Chong and others. So I kind of have a feeling that maybe he's speaking to them.
Trudeau.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with Xi, maybe when the two of them met, because, you know, definitely don't forget 3 hours meeting before, I think it was the same day or a day before Biden met, and that's considered one of the, like a, you know, huge turn of events and stuff, and that might well have set the road for, you know, turning the corner on the U.S.-China relations. So I'm just wondering whether it was a kind of, you know, again, I don't want to sound like a, you know, conspiracy theory, but maybe it was just a sort of a, you know, scratch my back, I scratch your sort of thing, you know, who knows, right? But it just doesn't appear to be just as it is on the surface. It just doesn't smell right to me personally.
Well, and certainly the fact that it was completely caught by the cameras, and it caught like when, you know, everything was clear, whatever, right? So
well, the camera was actually there. It's not like as if the camera comes afterwards. You know, if you watch the full clip, the camera is actually there to capture the whole thing.
Yeah. So
usually
they knew they were being filmed, most of them.
Exactly. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah. Well, we're at 7:12. I can't see any more questions, but I can't, for some reason, clearly can't see the full screen of questions. But are there
no more questions?
No more questions?
Yeah.
Thanks everyone. Starting tomorrow, Guelph and then different cities. So if you're in any of those cities, please do come out or spread the word that I'll be doing events, and same place, same time next week. Take care, everyone. See ya.
Ebola.
Yeah.